Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Mind Muscle Connection podcast. Today is a solo episode, and I have a topic I want to dive into. But first, before I dive into those, I have a couple reminders. So, first, if you could, if you enjoy this podcast, make sure you leave either a review and or a rating, so that way just more people are likely to listen to this podcast. So, again, if it's been helpful for you in any way, that would be much appreciated. Next, I have my one-on-one coaching service. So if you're just looking to take your training to the next level, maybe you're wanting to learn how to better program for yourself to build more muscle. Maybe you are stuck, or maybe you have just kind of always fat loss dieted and you just haven't built the body that you want. And you want to, and or you want to properly learn how to run a fat loss diet and just gear it towards you and learn how to take time away from fat loss dieting, then the one-on-one coaching service is for you. Really base a lot around education and learning how to work with your body rather than against it, and also just to teach you that fitness and nutrition is more than just training 7 days a week and just eating chicken and broccoli all the time. So if you're interested in that, there's a link to fill out application. And once you fill out that application, basically from there, we would just chat about your goals, where you're at, how we can bridge that gap, where you want to go. And then we can decide too if you're a good fit for the program. So just because you fill that out doesn't mean you are obligated to anything. We'll obviously have a conversation to make sure you would even be a good fit for the program, because again, it's not for everybody. Ideally, you would have about 1 to 2 years of experience. You have tracked your nutrition at some point in the past, but again, you just are stuck and you just want to get to that next level with your training and nutrition. Again, that link is in the show notes. You can also find it in my bio on Instagram. And also, if you do want to connect with me besides just the podcast, you can follow me on Instagram at jeffh91_. And I do Q&A 2 times a week there. So again, if you want to connect with me, make sure you give me a follow there. All right, so let's dive into the topic. So today, what I want to talk about is traits of a successful dieter. Okay, so we have basically the successful dieter, and then we have just the regular dieter. Okay, and so one of the biggest problems potential clients face, and people that start working with me, is that they lack structure in their nutrition, and most things that you do just end up being random. You probably have a goal. If you listen to this and you look at my content, you probably have a goal of adding muscle or losing more body fat. Just improving your body composition and potentially have a body transformation, whatever it may be. But other than that, other than eating more or eating less, that's really about it when it comes to your nutrition, right? It's like, hey, give me macros, and or when it comes to your nutrition, you just are like, oh, I just have to eat less or I have to eat more, right? That's really it. Or again, you just think in terms of like calories and macros, where it's like, hey, what are my calories for my macros? That's like the missing thing. But other than that, like everything you do is just relatively random. Whether you are a client or someone who enjoys my content, my goal is to teach you how to move from a regular dieter to a successful dieter. When you're a successful dieter, there's no more randomness in what you're doing. And also, I want to make this note too, just because we say dieter, that doesn't mean you're just fat loss dieting 24/7. I think when people hear diet, that's what they automatically assume is like, oh, I'm just going to have to eat like to lose weight, right? I feel like that's the basic definition of diet, but you have to remember diet's what you eat and what you do on a daily basis when it comes to nutrition, whether you're doing fat loss or not. So that's where we say it's successful dieter, right? Where, and this is going to be something that you'll find out is that it's more than just dieting for like losing weight or losing body fat. But being a successful dieter means everything you do will have a reason behind it, with your overall goals in mind. Keep in mind that overall goals may include things like, flexibility with your nutrition, enjoyment with your nutrition. So like what I mean by that is, it's not just, hey, you want to get to a goal. All right, well, here's the science-based way to get there. You have to follow this or else, right? And I think that's where a lot of people get themselves into trouble. And again, you will find out what kind of traits a successful dieter has. And one of them is being able to be flexible and getting away from that very rigid thinking. And we also we need to look at enjoyment. Now, I think that gets taken too far, and people think like, oh, I can enjoy whatever I want and still get the results that I want. But you obviously have to make some sacrifices, right? And also So that's part of nutrition as well, right? The flexibility of it, the enjoyment aspect of it. Like you don't want to do something like, again, people know like what they can do to get the body they want, or just like what nutrition protocols will help you lose weight, right? But a lot of them don't offer flexibility. They don't really offer any enjoyment whatsoever. So those are all things you have to take into consideration. And also you have to take into consideration the person's lifestyle and whatnot as well. This is why, again, when somebody just says, oh, hey, I just need macros, it's like, yeah, that's going to get you in a good starting point. That's better than not doing anything, but you have to take it a step further than that, right? And this is where, I kind of touch on my one-on-one coaching. This is where the one-on-one coaching kind of comes into play, right? It's like, okay, maybe you've tried tracking you've tracked calories and macros for a period of time, but you still like kind of run into these same like roadblocks. And this is where the art of coaching kind of comes in with all this. It's bridging that gap from you being that regular dieter. Again, the regular dieter, we'll talk about what that looks like, but they're just focused on calories and macros. They're just very focused on like things on paper. But it's bridging that gap between there to becoming the successful dieter, and everything in between that helps you get to that point, right? But also we have to take into consideration, how like where you want to go with things. Okay, so we also need to focus on, again, somebody wants goals like fat loss or muscle gain. We have to take that in consideration as well, and whatnot. So what I mean by that is, obviously if you want a goal and like, depending on where you want to go with it, there's certain things you have to do, right? So let's take flexibility. If you want to be like sub 10% body fat for males, 15-17% for females, it's like, okay, the flexibility is going to go down. The enjoyment's going to go down. And again, these are all things that you find out over time, and you can figure out how far you want to push it. But let's dive into what the successful dieter does and doesn't do. So the very first thing, and the first thing that the successful dieter does, and this is one thing that the message I put across in my content and with my clients, is you put your health first. Okay, so the successful dieter is going to put their health first. While I'm having a very tough time saying this, the successful dieter knows that if they improve their overall health, everything else will be easier. This means they place a large emphasis on things like stress management, sleep, and how things make them feel. And so what I mean by that is like overall health, like, if your hormones are out of whack, like, you can expect your fat loss or muscle gain to be much tougher. Maybe if you've been fat loss dieting for a long period of time, and like, again, your body has adapted to that, certain, and you're just kind of in this low energy all the time. It's like fat loss for you probably isn't going to be the best thing, right? Maybe you've had other things pop up because you've always been in a calorie deficit, or you just been like low energy. You're going to have a much tougher time losing body fat. Or again, maybe you have like a ton of stress going on. You have a lot of things on your plate. It's like and if you don't learn how to manage those things, you are going to struggle to lose body fat or build muscle. It's basically like trying to go cross country on one flat tire, right? It's like you have to get that, like, your health is the tire. Like, obviously there's a whole base, but if you don't have tires, you're not going to get anywhere, right? So again, your health is you can get somewhere, but it's going to take you much longer, and it's going to be much tougher to get there. And again, sleep as well. Sleep's going to be a very important thing. This is the thing where, somebody has low energy, or their hunger is super high, or their training sucks. It's like people want to like try to find all these things wrong with them, but then like their sleep habits are off, and they just kind of brush it off. It's like, oh no, it's something deeper than that. But again, sleep does play a massive role in this. If you're not getting good sleep, you're going to struggle to put on muscle and lose body fat. It's just going to be the way it is. But again, that's something that people just kind of brush off, and they think, oh, that's not me. I'm good with sleep. Or it's got to be something else. It's got to be the way I'm training. It's got to be, I need to do intermittent fasting. That's why I'm not losing weight. When again, their health, like their basic, their environment, everything is out of whack. And that's the problem. So again, fundamentally, we have to work on our overall health, right? And again, like, also how things make you feel is going to be important. So if a certain diet protocol makes you just super tired, super hungry, or certain foods don't make you feel good, but hey, it's quote unquote a health food that somebody said, it's like, you have to pay attention to these things, because again, if something makes you not feel great, like, there's something that you have to look into that more, right? And the regular dieter, what they do is they're only concerned about things like appearance. So again, it's all about, well, I don't really care how I feel. I just want to have this certain look. I want to look like I did 10 years ago. And I want to get to the same weight that I was. I don't really care what I do. I just want to get there. And again, so they're worried about scale weight, things like that. When it's like, yeah, that's what you've been doing, but you keep ending up in the same spot every single time. And again, they do these things at all costs. So that's where the regular dieter, that's what they'll typically do, right? It's like, hey, I want to lose 15 pounds. I really don't care how I get there. I just want to lose it. Doesn't matter to me. I'm just going to get there at all costs, right? And then they get there, nothing's changed. Maybe they're worse body composition because they didn't really focus on anything. And then what happens? And they go back, and then now they have to, oh, well, hey, I did that last time. It worked for me, so I'm going to go do that same thing again because it worked last time. And you just end up getting in this endless cycle where you're putting in the work, you're working hard, but then every single time you end up in the same spot. So again, this is one of the fundamental things that I teach clients is we have to put our health first. We have to track biofeedback. We have to see how we're feeling, right? Because that is so important. Again, if you're not feeling great or something seems off, like you have to look into that. Now, in saying that, if you are like, for example, trying to lose body fat or just trying to change the way you look, like there are going to be some times when you have to push and change things up. So I don't want to send a message also that it's going to be rainbows and butterflies all the time. Like you are going to have to make some sacrifices and adjustments and whatnot. And you have to push a little bit, but you can't just ignore the health side of things. You have to place an emphasis on that. That's at the foundation of everything we do. So again, the successful dieter puts their health first. They know that with their health, everything else is going to run smoother. Second, the successful dieter isn't always fat loss dieting. There's a time and place for fat loss dieting, but the successful dieter knows that they must take time away from an energy deficit for a period of time. I've talked a lot about metabolic adaptation, what happens there. Your body basically just adapts to what you do to it. So again, if you're just constantly giving it, like, you're not bringing in a lot of energy, your body's going to downregulate some of its processes and it's going to adapt to that. Now, we know if you listen to the last couple episodes that doesn't happen forever, but it is going to adapt while you are eating low calorie, and you have to do some things to transition out of that. But we also know that if you are always fat loss dieting, it's going to be very hard to put on muscle. And when you aren't putting on muscle, your goal look is going to be tough to get to. You're going to end up finding yourself being in this position where every time you lose weight or you diet for fat loss, you don't feel great, and then you just aren't happy with your look, right? You feel kind of like weak, just kind of like skinny fat almost in a way. That's typically how you will feel, and you'll just always be like, oh, I got to get smaller now. I got to lose more weight. I got to lose more weight. And then you end up doing this for years over years, and nothing changes with your physique, and you end up looking the same. And it's just because, again, you're just always trying to fat loss diet. You're always trying to lose more. And again, we know that from a hormonal standpoint, that's not great. From an overall health standpoint, that's not going to be great. And we know too that like when you do this all the time, it's going to be very tough to manage those times, and you're going to eventually get to the point to where you end up overeating at periods of time because your body's like, you aren't paying attention to these things. Again, you're somebody that you don't put your health first. You don't really worry about that. Again, it's all about the scale weight and like just getting smaller and laying out. And you do that, and you end up overeating at periods of time, and you gain that weight back, and you got to lose it again. And again, it just kind of like the first point I made, you end up getting in this endless cycle here. So again, the regular dieter tries to be their small scale weight, and they try to restrict energy 24/7. It's always, hey, I'm just fat loss dieting. What are your goals? Just fat loss dieting. And it never changes. It's always that. So again, we want to move you to the successful dieter side of things and move you to that, to where we are taking time away from fat loss dieting, because we know that that's going to be best for your long-term results. You're going to give your body the time it needs to be out of a calorie deficit. You're going to be able to fuel it. You're going to be able to build your body up. You're going to be able to build some muscle, which is going to help you with that look, that look that you're going for. So again, we have to take time away from fat loss dieting. And that's one of the main things we work on with all my clients. For some, it's a tough mindset to get out of and switch to eating more and focusing on like performance and like how you feel. But again, it's going to help long-term, and it's going to get you out of that endless cycle of just like restricting. And eventually I feel like it kind of gets you to this point where you almost just kind of hate what you're doing as well too, because it's like, you just, you associate like getting in better shape with being miserable. And again, there's times when it's not going to feel great, but you shouldn't feel miserable all the time. So again, we want to make sure that we're taking time away from fat loss dieting. I think a good time frame is to spend 2/3 of your time out of a fat loss diet. So, if we're talking within a year, we want to probably spend around, I think this would be 2/3. We want to spend, about 8 months out of a calorie deficit, right? Again, that makes it easier to manage that time when you are in it. You can kind of push it a little bit more, but you also build your body up in that time. You're not telling your body to be this like very energy efficient machine, which is essentially what you do when you're basically, this is an analogy I like, you're basically like in low battery mode all the time. When your phone gets to 20%, I think it's around 20%, and it asks you, do you want to go into low battery mode? And what does it do? It basically just like only uses the things that is necessary and what you need, and everything else it just kind of like turns down. And that's basically what your body does. And so again, it becomes more energy efficient. So if you're always fat loss dieting, you're going to be in something similar to a low battery mode. Okay, so the next thing the successful dieter does is they don't have an all or nothing mindset. Basically the successful dieter, if they have a suboptimal meal, they just make sure that they get back on track in the next one, right? One meal happened, whatever it is, it wasn't my greatest meal. It's okay. I can get back on it in the next one. Or maybe you're just at the point where like you still kind of let a couple meals get to you. So then you don't have a great day, but you make sure the next one is back on plan. You're not letting these linger on for extended periods of time. This is a big thing that we work on with clients as well, is getting them away from trying to be perfect, where that ends up like trying to be perfect, I think is not necessarily a bad thing, but we're not going to be perfect all the time. So what do you do when you aren't perfect? And that is going to determine a lot of things there. So we want to make sure that if you do get off track, that's okay. The next one is just going to be back on plan, whatever that may be. If it's the next day, if it's the next meal, I think as you get better at this over time, you get back on track sooner. And also, I think thinking of it not as you fell off track either. We'll kind of talk about some things that the successful dieter does around those meals as well. But I think also reframing it as like, I'm not necessarily off track. I think, again, when you have more of these traits that I'm about to talk about, you end up getting away from that thought process of, oh, hey, I fell off track as well. But again, the biggest thing is like, okay, if you don't have a great meal, maybe it wasn't as nutritious as it could have been. Maybe you didn't get the protein you want. That's fine. Just the next meal, don't let it linger into an entire day turn into entire weekend turn into entire week. I think the better. A sign of progress is that you basically shorten that time frame of when you get back on. You shorten the time frame and you reduce the frequency of how often it happens, right? So it's like maybe in the past it was like you would fall off and it took you 2 to 3 weeks to get back on track, or you also did it once a week and every single week. Whereas like maybe once you get into coaching or you start to work on becoming a successful dieter, you end up, maybe instead of weekly, now it becomes once a month. Instead of it being 2 weeks that you get off track, it's just 2 days now, right? And then you just slowly continue to bring it down. Because when you think about it, for example, one meal, in the grand scheme of things, that's not going to, like, that's just such a small time frame that nothing bad can really happen, right? Same thing with a couple of days. Like at the end of the day, if it ends up being a day or a weekend, it's like that is such a small time frame in the grand scheme of things. But it does become an issue when it's weeks at a time, months at a time. Like that's where you'll run into issues. So the successful dieter learns from their mistakes, but doesn't let them bleed into future meals or days. So again, it's all about, okay, well, you maybe didn't have the greatest meal. What can you take from it? What can you learn from it to move forward, right? I think you're going to make mistakes. There's going to be failures along the way of becoming a successful dieter, but you learn from those mistakes and you get better at them. It becomes a problem when you don't learn from them and they just keep happening and you're just like, oh, whatever it is, what it is. The regular dieter aims to be perfect. And when they aren't, they just say F it and that's it. Right. So again, the regular dieter they don't look at their mistakes. They don't learn from their mistakes. And they just, when they do have something that is not great, they just go off track and they just say, screw it. Right. There's nothing to keep them moving forward at all. They're either completely moving forward 100% or they're none. So again, that's what the regular dieter does. And we want to move you to that successful dieter where not every mess up is the end of the world. I always like to say this analogy too with that is like, don't think of your fitness or nutrition as like sudden death over time, right? Like you're not, one mess up doesn't mean you're going to lose, right? For those are like, I think sudden death, I think is mostly in like, I think there's some football, there's certain situations where it becomes sudden death, but like hockey is in the playoffs, it's sudden death, or even overtime in the regular season is sudden death too, right? Where it's like next goal wins and it's over. You have to be a little bit more, that the strategy for that would be a lot different than if it's, you know, a 3-period game and you're down by 1 goal. It's like, okay, whatever, you just have to move forward as soon as possible. But obviously when you're in sudden death, you have to like, your strategy changes because of what's going on there, what the implications are. But again, health and fitness is not that. It's not sudden death over time. So the next thing the successful dieter does is they know what their struggles are. And again, you learn this by, obviously you know this going into it, what your struggles are, what you kind of struggle with, but you also learn this by messing up and failing as well. Okay. So again, if you have this trait of all or nothing, every time you mess up, oh, it is what you don't, yes, you have an idea of what your struggles are, but you don't get to necessarily work through them because again, it's like, oh, I messed up, whatever. So I think part of this is learning what your struggles are. So the successful dieter knows where they struggle most and learns to improve, work with their struggles rather than against them. The regular dieter doesn't pay attention to this and doesn't aim to improve anything. And they just say things like, I am the way I am. Oh, this is just what happens. And they don't necessarily work with their struggles. They just kind of ignore them and just say, oh, that's how I am. You know, I can't, this is just who I am and what I do. So again, knowing what your struggles are, I think are key because you can work with them and whatnot. And so like, for example, a client, she knew that like this happened multiple different times, but you know, there's a stressful period coming up. Her husband was out of town. She had the kids. And she was in a fat loss diet, right? The first time that happened, you know, things kind of went out of like, not, I don't want to say out of control, but you know, she definitely had some things that she could have worked on and improved from that time. Then the next time that happened, she was in the same situation. She knew this and she planned ahead. She was able to plan ahead and work around it, right? Whereas if you're not aware of these things and you just kind of are just like, oh, whatever it is, what it is, you don't pay attention to it, it's going to keep showing up, right? Where had she, you know, had she not learned from doing that the first time, the next time around, the same thing would have happened again. Now, we don't know that for sure, but the likelihood of that would have been very high. So again, you need to learn from your mistakes and you need to learn what your struggles are so that way you are able to work around them. For me, you know, something that comes to mind is like, if I didn't track my protein, I would likely be way under protein because I just don't really like protein. I would much rather have carbs and fats in my meals. So for me, you know, that's a struggle. I know that I need to make sure that I'm getting my protein in and I have a plan to get all my protein in because again, if I don't have a plan for it, I'm less likely to get it in. So again, one important trait here for the successful dieter is knowing what your struggles are. And again, you learn this over time and you get better at it over time. This isn't going to be something that you go into your first fat loss diet and you just know this. There's going to be some trial and error here with it. Next, and this is a big one too, is the successful dieter knows when to enjoy and be intentional with food rather than blaming it on external circumstances. So the successful dieter knows when to just enjoy food and is intentional with their food choices. You know, maybe it's your a favorite food, right? It's like, hey, I really enjoy pizza. I'm going to enjoy this tonight. I'm going to plan around it, but I am going to have it because it's my favorite thing. Or somebody makes something that you really enjoy. You only get it once a year. Again, you're not going to be like, oh, I can't have it. I'm in a fat loss diet. You're just going to overthink that and want it more and more. And that's going to end up leading you to that all or nothing mindset. So some of these do kind of go hand in hand here, but you know, whether that be a favorite food or you have a certain event, like again, maybe there's a birthday party or a date night or an anniversary or whatever it may be. Like if you go into it like, oh, I'm on a fat loss diet, like you're going to, again, you're either going to stick with it, you're going to be miserable and that's not going to be fun. Or you're also going to get to the point to where it's like you get to the all or nothing mindset of like, oh, I don't really care. And then that's not going to be helpful for your goals. So again, like being very intentional and like thinking through it of like, okay, you know what, this is a date night. I only get this with my partner every once in a while. Like I'm not going to stress about every food choice. I'm going to just plan around that for the week or the day. And I'm going to enjoy the meal or whatever. Right. And they also know that they are consciously making a decision to eat/enjoy food and are okay with that choice because they have thought through it. They enjoy it and move on. The regular dieter doesn't think much about this and just eats foods without much thought and then stresses about their food choices, right? I'm sure you've been there before where you don't really think about the event, you get there, and then it's just like, oh, I don't know what to do. This is because of that event that I went off track and I just can't do this. And then you stress about the choices you did make. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done that. That's not a great place to be, right? Because again, I feel like it leads to that all or nothing kind of mindset with everything, and it's not helpful. So again, like being intentional with your food choices is going to be key here, and this does require some planning ahead. Again, if you know you have a certain event coming up, like again, or even a wedding, it's like, do you really need to stress about eating every little thing? Like again, you can come up with a plan to work around it. So I think knowing when to enjoy and be intentional is so important here, because you can get yourself into trouble if you're always just thinking, oh, that's bad food, now I can't eat it. I think that is going to be a slippery slope. And again, I think the big thing is like just the intentional part of it. Don't just eat food because it's in front of you or something like that. And you can do that, right? But realize that that's probably not going to get you to the goal that you want. And if you do get to that point, you can, if you are a successful dieter, you can learn from it. But I think the big thing is getting away from like just not being conscious of what you're doing. That's the key here. And look, there might be certain times where you do just are like, hey, you know what, I really want to enjoy this food. As long as you think it through, you're in a good spot there. Now, if you keep doing that and you're upset with your choices, that's where you need to look into things. Next, and this goes hand in hand with the last one, the successful dieter plans ahead. They look to see what their upcoming week looks like and if they have certain events or things that may throw them off. The regular dieter just aimlessly wanders into each day and week. So again, if you have an event, like if you can plan for it, that's going to be key. It's going to help you stay on track more. Again, I go back to that client that I just talked about. She knew that after the first time her husband was gone and she was going to have a lot more responsibility. And then obviously with work, like she was able to plan ahead and it helped her stay on track. Whereas again, if she didn't have a plan for that, who knows where she would have went. So again, I think having a plan is key. And again, this goes back to events. Like you can plan ahead for the week in events where you maybe save up some calories or work around it early in the week. But at the very least, you want to make sure the day of you are planning ahead for this and taking the event into account or whatever it may be that night. What you don't want to do is like not have a plan. Like it's a Saturday, you don't want to go into it not having a plan for your meals early in the day. You just kind of eat whatever, and then you go into that meal at night and you do the same thing. That's what we want to avoid there. So planning ahead is key. And I think also like if you are in a fat loss diet, planning ahead can also look like just making sure you don't get to the point to where you're just absolutely starving, right? If you don't have a plan for the day and then you get to the point to where you're absolutely starving and you just want to eat anything and everything, that's where you're going to run into issues. This can also look like making sure you have an idea of what you're going to eat if you are going out to eat. So yeah, these are all things that the successful dieter will work on. The next one is they think about how nutrition affects training. So what I mean by this is like, this can be nutrition around your meal, around your workouts, making sure you're fueled for your training. This can also be like, hey, if I'm doing something that's a little bit more performance based, like a group class or CrossFit, or you're trying to run a marathon or something, you're not like also combining that with restricting your calories, going low carb and whatnot, because those aren't going to be conducive with each other. So again, making sure that your nutrition matches up with your training is going to be super important. Again, like I said, that can go with like, the type of training you're doing, with your nutrition goal, what energy balance you're in, but it can also be like, making sure you're fueled for your training sessions, and two, making sure that you are getting protein in after your training sessions and things like that. Like you just want to be careful that you're not skimping out on like your peri-workout being like nutrition around your workout. Like you just want to make sure that there's, you're not going too long without food beforehand. You're not going too long without food after. And again, making sure you're fueled there. And then also, like I said, making sure that like the phase of nutrition also matches up with like the phase of training that you are in. Again, like trying to train for a half marathon on like low calories is a recipe for Suboptimal body composition. Again, certain situations could potentially lend themselves to it, but 9 times out of 10, not a good idea. It's just going to make fat loss tougher, and you're going to lose some muscle in the process as well, right? So again, making sure that the successful dieter, make sure that their training matches up, their nutrition matches up with their training. Next, knows how certain foods or phases of nutrition make them feel. So again, this is where like, hey, I could give you calories and macros, but if you're not looking into this, like in terms of like, hey, you're in a fat loss phase, you're gonna notice a little bit more hunger. So you want to have some strategies to help mitigate hunger, and not think and making sure you're going high protein, things like that, and also knowing that when you are in a fat loss phase, again, hunger is going to be higher. You're probably going to have a little bit lower energy. Food's going to taste a lot better, right? So again, like the successful dieter pays attention to these things, and I have an idea of what to expect there with it. But also maybe like certain foods or meals don't keep you full, but other foods, meals do keep you feeling full, right? And you learn that over time. You learn that with experience. So you can start to apply those things to yourself during fat loss phase or a building phase, whatever it may be. Rather than just looking at food as like, oh, that has that many calories. Is it good or bad? Hey, it has this much fat. Is it good or bad? It's like all these things like that can be important, but you have to look at the big picture as well. You can't just think of food as that. You have to think about how it makes you feel and what how full does it make you feel? Because again, you could have, you could have something that's like 100 calories and it's like, oh yeah, I made the better choice because I had something that was 100 calories versus 200 calories. But then an hour later, you're freaking starving. And then you go and eat more food. It's like, okay, well, in the moment that was a solid choice, but how did that make you feel as a whole, right? This is why you have to be careful with this. Like, hey, is this food better or is that food better? It's like, oh, there's so many things that go into that. Because typically like when I do hear, this is more from like people that are like, they just kind of started getting into work, like nutrition and stuff like that. It's like, oh, I ate celery for a snack. I ate carrots for a snack. I was like, that's great, but you're still going to be freaking starving and you're going to want to eat more later. So that's like, yeah, that choice in the moment was solid, but probably not going to be great long term. So, but you can't tell somebody that, right? But again, like learning these things is going to be key, and that's what the successful dieter does. And like I mentioned, the successful dieter also knows that certain phases of nutrition may have more hunger than others, or again, you may not feel you're most shredded during a building phase, but again, these things and you're aware of them, and it helps you just stay on track with things. Lastly, the successful dieter is patient with themselves. The successful dieter aims for improvement daily, but is also patient with themselves. They know it's a journey. This stuff takes time, whereas the regular dieter lacks patience and wants everything yesterday, right? It's like, hey, I ate good yesterday, but my weight didn't move. What's going on? Oh, I was perfect this weekend and my scale weight went up 0.2 pounds. What's going on here? Right. And that just comes from a lack of patience with the process. Like you're not going to just see these immediate results. Like you have to be patient with it. And you have to know that it's a journey and there's going to be some things that go well. There's going to be some things that don't go well. But the biggest thing is that you can continue to move forward, but you have to be patient with it. And this goes for building muscle too. I think that fat loss is going to take some time. You can get it done in a little bit quicker of a time frame, but again, you can't expect to change your body in 1 month. Again, I think that just a lot of times, a lot of changes people make just comes from a lack of patience and just wanting to see things happen right away. Again, this is a skill too, right? Like just because you feel this way now doesn't mean you can't get to the point to where you are a successful dieter and you're more patient with yourself. All these things are skills and you have to practice them and you're going to get better. So you can take all these things that I said and you might be closer to the regular dieter, but over time, you're going to continue to get better at these things and get closer and closer to being a successful dieter. And also realize too, you're going to struggle with some of these more than others as well, right? You may be really good at all these things, but then all of a sudden it's like, hey, patience lacks. So that's going to make everything else a little bit tougher. So that's probably the thing that you need to work on the most. Maybe I'm just trying to think here of a good example here. So like maybe maybe you like know all these things, but you still always like try to fat loss diet, right? It's like you're going to see good results, but you could take it even further by taking a break from fat loss dieting. Or maybe you're good at all these things, but then you don't really care about like your health. It's still more about like the only focus is like the appearance and the number on the scale and like the physical side of things. Maybe you're good at all these things and like you don't know what your struggles are really, right? So again, you can't really prepare for those things yet. So again, these are all like you could have some of these and not all of them, but your goal is to strive to be the successful dieter, and you do that by continuing to practice this over time. So hopefully this was helpful. If you guys have any questions on this, you can reach out either on Instagram or via email. And that is it for this episode, and I will talk to you guys next week.